A 17-year-old girl disappeared while walking to a friend's house, leaving her family in anguish. But decades later, a biker makes a confession that sends shockwaves through the entire community. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from what part of the world you're watching, because now I'm going to tell you how all of this happened. This is not merely a story about a teenager who disappeared on her way to a friend's house. This is the account of a tragedy that would haunt a small Pennsylvania town for nearly 4 decades, leaving wounds that time alone could not heal. On the 19th of October, 1983, 16-year-old Amy Biggs completed her cheerleading practice at Oakdale High School at approximately 4:15 in the afternoon. The autumn air carried a slight chill as golden leaves crunched beneath her white sneakers. Amy, with her light brown ponytail swinging behind her, decided to take her usual shortcut through Pinewood Park to reach her friend Sarah's house, where they planned to study for an upcoming biology test. Amy was known throughout Oakdale for her infectious laugh and kindness that extended to everyone from the most popular students to those who sat alone at lunch. A junior with aspirations of becoming a veterinarian, she maintained exemplary grades while participating in numerous extracurricular activities. That Wednesday afternoon, she wore her favorite denim jacket over her cheerleading uniform, carrying her school backpack and a small gym bag. By 6:30 that evening, concern began to take root. Sarah Hammond, having expected Amy by 5 o'clock, called the Biggs household to ask if plans had changed. Robert and Helen Biggs, Amy's parents, felt the first tendrils of worry wrap around their hearts. The 15-minute walk from school through the park to Sarah's house was one Amy had taken countless times before. By 7 o'clock, Robert Biggs contacted the Oakdale Police Department. Officer Thomas Wilson arrived at their 2-story colonial home on Maple Street within 20 minutes. He collected information about Amy's appearance, clothing, and usual routes while attempting to reassure the increasingly distressed parents that teenagers often lose track of time. But Amy was not the type to disappear without notice. She was responsible, considerate, and punctual, traits her teachers consistently praised during parent-teacher conferences. As darkness enveloped the town, flashlight beams cut through Pinewood Park as Officer Wilson and 3 additional officers conducted an initial search. They found no sign of Amy, no discarded belongings, no indication of what might have transpired along the winding dirt path that served as a shortcut for many Oakdale residents. Throughout that long night, Robert and Helen Biggs sat by their kitchen telephone, jumping at each ring, hoping for news that would not come. By morning, their daughter's absence had transformed from a worry to a nightmare. Missing person reports were filed, Amy's photograph was placed on the bulletin board at the police station, and the community began to mobilize. What no one in Oakdale knew that morning was that a 21-year-old local man named Frank Miller had encountered Amy in the park the previous afternoon. No one knew that this chance meeting would remain a secret for 37 years, or that the truth would only emerge when a dying man could no longer bear the weight of his conscience. The morning after Amy's disappearance dawned, with a somber gray sky over Oakdale. While Frank Miller went about his day keeping his encounter with Amy hidden, the rest of the community was already springing into action. What began as concern had transformed overnight into a town-wide emergency. By 8 o'clock on the morning of October 20th, 1983, the Oakdale Police Station bustling with activity. Chief Michael Denton, a 20-year veteran of the department, established a command center in the station's conference room. Maps of Pinewood Park and surrounding areas covered the walls, with red pins marking the areas already searched the previous night. Volunteers began arriving at the station by 9:30. Teachers from Oakdale High School, employees from the local factory where Robert Biggs worked, neighbors, church members, and even strangers touched by the news of a missing teenager, all came forward to help. The search coordinator divided them into teams of 8, assigning each group a specific section of the park and adjacent neighborhoods. The searchers formed long lines, walking arm's length apart through Pinewood Park's 75 acres. They methodically examined every bush, drainage ditch, and wooded area. Officers instructed them to mark anything unusual with the bright orange flags they carried. The sound of people calling Amy's name echoed through the trees. Meanwhile, Helen Biggs sat at her kitchen table with three of her closest friends, creating missing person flyers. Amy's school photo smiled from the page, alongside descriptions of her height, 5 feet 6 inches, her light brown hair, blue eyes, and the clothes she had last been seen wearing. By noon, volunteers had distributed hundreds of these flyers throughout Oakdale and neighboring communities, placing them in shop windows, on telephone poles, and handing them directly to passers-by. Local television station WOAK sent a news crew to cover the search. By the 6 o'clock news, Amy's story had reached households across western Pennsylvania. The reporter stood in Pinewood Park as the day's search was concluding, explaining how anyone with information should contact the Oakdale Police Department immediately. That evening, Robert and Helen Biggs appeared on camera, their faces showing the strain of 24 hours without their daughter. They appealed directly to viewers, asking for any information about Amy. Robert's voice trembled slightly as he described his daughter's responsible nature and how out of character this disappearance was. Helen clutched Amy's cheerleading jacket throughout the interview. By the second day, the FBI became involved. Special Agent Diana Reeves arrived from the Pittsburgh field office, bringing with her specialized resources for missing children cases. She established a dedicated tip line, and calls began coming in immediately. Each was meticulously logged and investigated, though most led nowhere. As the searches continued, police officers interviewed everyone in Amy's circle: her boyfriend Jason, her teachers, classmates, and neighbors living near the park. They asked about anyone acting strangely in the area, unfamiliar vehicles, or anything out of the ordinary on the afternoon Amy disappeared. An elderly resident mentioned hearing a motorcycle in the park around the time Amy would have been walking through, but in a town where the Road Kings Motorcycle Club was a common sight, this detail didn't immediately stand out as significant. The first 48 hours after Amy's disappearance passed without a single concrete lead. Hope remained strong among the searchers, but privately, the law enforcement officials exchanged knowing glances. Experience had taught them that with each passing hour, the chances of finding Amy safe diminished considerably. As the first week of investigation progressed, Detective James Harmon from the Oakdale Police Department took charge of examining every potential lead. Experience had taught him that in cases like Amy's, answers often lay hidden in the details of the victim's daily life. By October 25, 1983, investigators began systematically exploring several lines of inquiry. At the top of their list was Jason Mitchell, Amy's boyfriend of 8 months. The 17-year-old baseball player was visibly distraught during his interview at the station. Detective Harmon questioned him extensively about his relationship with Amy, any recent arguments, and his whereabouts during her disappearance. Multiple teammates confirmed Jason had been at baseball practice until 5:30 that evening, placing him across town when Amy vanished. After thorough verification, investigators reluctantly crossed him off their suspect list. Attention then turned to Oakdale High School's janitor, 52-year-old Walter Collins, who had a prior conviction for assault from his 20s. This lead initially seemed promising until records confirmed Collins had been visiting his sister in Erie, Pennsylvania, nearly 100 miles away, on the day Amy disappeared. His sister and several neighbors verified his presence there throughout the entire week. Detective Harmon's investigation revealed another disturbing detail. In the weeks before her disappearance, Amy had received several unusual phone calls. According to Sarah Hammond and Amy's mother, these calls came 2 or 3 times weekly. Sometimes the caller would remain silent. Other times, they would immediately disconnect. In the era before caller identification technology, tracing these calls proved impossible. Investigators contacted the telephone company, but learned no records existed that could identify the caller. The police thoroughly examined Amy's bedroom, looking for any clues to her state of mind or potential plans. Her diary, discovered in her nightstand drawer, contained normal teenage entries about school, friends, and dreams of becoming a veterinarian. The final entry, dated October 18th, the day before she vanished, mentioned excitement about an upcoming biology test she felt prepared for. Nothing suggested Amy planned to leave voluntarily or feared for her safety. Officers interviewed residents living near Pinewood Park again, paying particular attention to 78-year-old Harold Weber's mention of hearing a motorcycle. Weber lived in the small cottage at the park's edge and often sat on his porch in the afternoons. He recalled hearing a motorcycle somewhere in the park around 4:30, but couldn't identify its exact location or direction. With the Road Kings Motorcycle Club frequently riding through town, investigators initially considered this information too commonplace to be significant. Special Agent Reeves expanded the investigation to include registered offenders in a 50-mile radius, but none had known connections to Amy or demonstrated suspicious behavior around the time of her disappearance. As October turned to November, each potential lead ended in disappointment. The investigation continued, but the sense of urgency that characterized the first days began to wane. Police officers who had worked 16-hour shifts were scaling back to normal schedules. The command center remained operational, but the frantic energy had dissipated, replaced by the methodical pace of a long-term investigation that showed troubling signs of growing cold. By early December of 1983, the steady rhythm of investigation had slowed to occasional pulses of activity whenever a new tip arrived. The command center at the Oakdale Police Station, once buzzing with constant activity, was dismantled. The large maps and photos of Amy were carefully folded and placed into a growing case file. Special Agent Reeves returned to the FBI field office in Pittsburgh, leaving local authorities with protocols for handling any significant developments. As winter settled over Oakdale, a subtle shift occurred in how people spoke about Amy. Conversations that once used present tense gradually incorporated past tense. The school yearbook committee debated whether to include Amy's photo with her junior class or in a special memorial section. They ultimately decided to do both, leaving her regular portrait with her classmates and adding a full-page dedication. February 19, 1984, marked what would have been Amy's 17th birthday. The Biggs family placed a notice in the Oakdale Gazette, thanking the community for their continued support and asking anyone with information to come forward. The newspaper ran a small article on page 3, a stark contrast to the front-page coverage Amy's disappearance had initially received. Physical changes manifested in Robert and Helen Biggs as months stretched on without answers. Robert's formerly dark brown hair showed prominent streaks of gray at his temples. His shoulders, once squared with determination during press conferences, gradually hunched under invisible weight. Helen lost 15 pounds from her already slender frame, her clothes hanging loosely as she moved through town with a distracted gaze that neighbors described as looking through people rather than at them. Amy's bedroom remained untouched, becoming a time capsule of 1983 teenage life. Helen dusted the shelves weekly, straightening the row of cheerleading trophies and adjusting the stuffed animals on the bed. She washed the sheets monthly with the same lavender detergent Amy had preferred, though no one slept between them. The first anniversary of Amy's disappearance brought a renewed flurry of media attention. Local television ran a special report revisiting the case. The Oakdale Police Department held a press conference announcing they were still actively investigating, though observers noted there were no new leads to share. By 1986, Amy's case was officially classified as cold within the department. Detective Harmon, who had since been promoted to sergeant, still reviewed the files periodically, but active investigation had ceased. The thick binder containing interview transcripts, search reports, and dead-end leads was transferred to a storage room where similar unsolved cases rested on metal shelves. New families moved to Oakdale, who had never heard of Amy Biggs. Children born after her disappearance started attending the same school she once had, passing her photo in the trophy case without recognizing her face. The community continued to evolve while Amy remained 16, frozen in time through photographs and memories that grew more distant with each passing year. Meanwhile, Frank Miller continued his life in Oakdale, repairing motorcycles and riding with the Road Kings, Occasionally, he would drive past Pinewood Park and feel a momentary tightness in his chest that he tried to ignore. Unlike other citizens of Oakdale who gradually moved forward with their lives, Robert and Helen Biggs refused to allow Amy's case to remain shelved and forgotten. Their determination crystallized in 1987 when they established the Amy Biggs Foundation, dedicated to maintaining awareness about their daughter's disappearance and assisting other families facing similar tragedies. Robert, at 43 years old, made the difficult decision to take early retirement from the manufacturing plant where he had worked for 22 years. The partial pension provided just enough financial support when combined with careful budgeting of their savings. Helen continued working part-time at the library, though her colleagues noted she seemed most animated when discussing the foundation's work. The Biggs converted a small storefront on Main Street into the foundation's headquarters. Inside, they meticulously organized every piece of information related to Amy's case. Maps covered the walls with color-coded pins marking areas searched, possible sightings, and locations of interest. Filing cabinets contained folders of tips received over the years, categorized by date and potential relevance. A large corkboard displayed newspaper clippings chronicling the investigation from its initial frenzy to its gradual fade from public attention. Their foundation work expanded beyond Amy's case. They distributed safety information to schools, helped coordinate searches for other missing persons, and provided emotional support to families enduring similar ordeals. The Biggs became recognized experts on missing persons cases, their expertise born from painful experience rather than professional training. In 1990, the Biggs appeared on the nationally televised program America's Missing, bringing Amy's story to a national audience. The segment featured age progression images created by forensic artists showing what Amy might look like at 23 years old. Similar appearances followed on other programs throughout the 90s and early 2000s, each broadcast generating new tips that inevitably led nowhere but reinforced the Biggs' commitment to continue searching. Every October 19th, the anniversary of Amy's disappearance, Robert and Helen organized a candlelight walk through Pinewood Park. During the early years, hundreds participated. By the turn of the century, attendance dwindled to several dozen, primarily family friends and parents of other missing children. The reduced numbers never deterred the Biggs, who maintained that even one candle kept hope alive. Their persistence was not universally admired. Well-meaning friends, family members, and even their pastor occasionally suggested that finding closure might require accepting they might never know what happened to Amy. Helen would respond that a parent's love doesn't recognize closure, only continued hope and determination. The Biggs developed deep bonds with other families of missing children, creating an informal support network united by shared experience. These relationships sustained them through difficult anniversaries, holidays, and milestones Amy never reached: her 21st birthday, her expected college graduation, the wedding she would never have. Throughout these years, Frank Miller observed the Biggs' efforts from a distance. He occasionally drove past their foundation office, sometimes slowing his truck to watch Robert hanging new missing person flyers in the window. Each encounter intensified the guilt he carried, though not enough to compel his confession. As decades passed, Robert's hair turned completely white. Helen developed arthritis in her hands from years of typing letters to politicians and law enforcement agencies. Yet their determination remained undiminished, a beacon of parental devotion that would ultimately lead to answers they never anticipated. While the Biggs pursued their relentless search for answers, Frank Miller constructed a life designed to appear ordinary while concealing the extraordinary burden he carried. His existence in Oakdale spanned decades without raising suspicions, a testament to how effectively everyday routines can mask even the darkest secrets. Frank lived in the same modest one-bedroom apartment on Cedar Street for 26 years. The building's faded brick exterior and minimal amenities kept the rent affordable on his inconsistent income. Neighbors described him as quiet but polite, the kind of person who would nod hello but rarely initiated conversations. Few were invited into his sparsely furnished living space, where the most personal item was a collection of motorcycle magazines dating back to the 1970s. His professional life followed a pattern of competence without distinction. Frank worked primarily as a motorcycle mechanic at various garages around Oakdale and neighboring towns. Employers found him reliable, though somewhat distant. His technical skills with engines earned respect among fellow mechanics, but he never formed close friendships with co-workers, always declining invitations to after-work gatherings. The Road Kings Motorcycle Club provided Frank's primary social connection. He had joined at 19, 2 years before encountering Amy, and maintained his membership through the decades. Even there, older members noted, he kept to the periphery of group activities, participating in rides but rarely in the camaraderie that followed. By his 50th birthday, younger members knew him simply as Old Frank, a solitary figure who could fix any engine problem but shared little of himself. Behind this carefully constructed facade, Frank lived a parallel life dominated by guilt. He developed rituals to manage his anxiety, including meticulously clipping and saving every newspaper article about Amy's disappearance. These he kept in a locked metal box hidden beneath loose floorboards in his bedroom closet, occasionally reviewing them late at night when sleep proved elusive. Frank came close to revealing his secret multiple times over the years. In 1991, after seeing Robert Biggs on television pleading for information, he drove to the Oakdale police station and sat in the parking lot for 3 hours before driving away. In 2004, he drafted a 12-page confession letter only to burn it in his kitchen sink, watching the ashes swirl down the drain. During a particularly difficult period in 2011, he began attending services at the Biggs Church, sitting in the back row and leaving before anyone could engage him in conversation. Each year, on October 19th, Frank would call in sick to work and spend the day alone in his apartment, a private acknowledgement of the anniversary that the rest of the town publicly commemorated. The trajectory of Frank's life changed irrevocably in January 2020 when persistent back pain led to a doctor's appointment that revealed advanced pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was unambiguous. He had perhaps 8 to 12 months remaining. This terminal diagnosis forced Frank to confront not only his mortality, but also the possibility of carrying his secret beyond the grave. On the morning of April 15, 2020, Frank Miller awoke with an unexpected sense of clarity. He shaved carefully, dressed in clean clothes, and drove his pickup truck to the Oakdale Police Department. At the front desk, he asked to speak with someone about Amy Biggs. Officer Damon Wells, a 26-year-old rookie only 3 months into his career with the Oakdale Police Department, was manning the front desk when Frank Miller requested to speak about Amy Biggs. Officer Wells had learned about the case during training. It was part of departmental history, a cautionary example of how seemingly ordinary days could suddenly turn extraordinary. He immediately contacted Detective Susan Martinez, the department's senior cold case investigator. Detective Martinez, a 47-year-old veteran with 22 years of police experience, arrived at the front desk within minutes. She escorted Frank to interview room 2, a small space with beige walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, and a recording system that had been upgraded multiple times since Amy's disappearance. The detective activated the recording equipment at 9:17 that morning, identifying herself and the date before asking Frank to state his name and purpose. What followed was a confession 37 years in the making. Frank spoke in a quiet, steady voice, occasionally pausing to sip water from a paper cup. He described seeing Amy walking through Pinewood Park on October 19, 1983. He had been riding his Harley-Davidson motorcycle on the dirt path, confirming the account of Harold Weber, the elderly man who reported hearing a motorcycle that day. Frank revealed details about Amy that had never been released to the public. He correctly described the charm bracelet she wore that day: a silver chain with 3 charms, a cheerleading megaphone, a cat, and a letter A knew about a small tear in her backpack's left strap that her mother had repaired with blue thread. These details convinced Detective Martinez she was hearing the truth. The confession continued as Frank explained how he had approached Amy, offering her a ride. When she refused, he became enraged. Frank described the subsequent events in clinical terms, seeming detached from his own actions, as if recounting something he had witnessed rather than perpetrated. Detective Martinez later noted in her report that this dissociation was common among perpetrators describing their crimes decades later. After harming Amy, Frank explained, he transported her body on his motorcycle to a remote area of Allegheny State Forest, approximately 32 miles from Oakdale. He described the location in detail, a clearing between two distinctive oak trees, now likely grown much larger, near a rock formation shaped like a turtle's back. When Detective Martinez asked why he was confessing after nearly 4 decades, Frank gestured to his gaunt frame and explained his terminal diagnosis. He told her about the many times he had almost come forward and how he couldn't face passing away with this secret intact. The cancer, he explained, had given him a deadline that forced his hand. For 3 hours, Frank answered questions, drew maps, and provided details that would help investigators locate Amy's remains. When the formal statement was complete, he signed the typed confession without hesitation. As Detective Martinez placed him under arrest, reading him his rights, witnesses described a visible change in Frank's demeanor, a releasing of tension, as if an invisible weight had been lifted. By early afternoon, news of the confession spread through the department. The current police chief, Thomas Reeves, personally contacted Robert and Helen Biggs to inform them of the dramatic development. The case that had haunted Oakdale for decades had suddenly, unexpectedly broken open. While Robert and Helen Biggs absorbed the shocking development of Frank Miller's confession, law enforcement officials moved quickly to assemble a recovery team. Chief Reeves contacted the State Police Forensic Services Unit on the afternoon of April 15, 2020, requesting specialized personnel and equipment for a challenging recovery operation. By dawn on April 16th, a team of 22 professionals gathered at the Oakdale Police Department. The group included 4 forensic anthropologists from Western Pennsylvania University, 6 state police forensic investigators, 8 Oakdale officers, 3 cadaver dog handlers, and a geological surveyor familiar with Allegheny State Forest. Detective Martinez briefed the team using the hand-drawn maps Frank Miller had created during his confession. The search faced immediate challenges. 37 years had transformed the landscape Frank described. Trees that had been saplings in 1983 now stood tall and mature. Paths had changed course or disappeared entirely. Erosion had altered the contours of the land. The team's surveyor compared Frank's descriptions with historical and current topographical maps, identifying 3 potential locations that matched his recollections. The convoy of vehicles departed Oakdale at 7:30 that morning, traveling 32 miles to the northeastern section of Allegheny State Forest. The first search area, a clearing near Turtle Rock, a distinctive formation mentioned in Frank's confession, yielded nothing despite 8 hours of methodical examination. The second day focused on an area 2 miles west, where 2 mature oak trees stood approximately 15 feet apart. Again, the search produced no results. On the third day, April 18th, the team explored the final location. At 11:15 in the morning, one of the cadaver dogs, a German shepherd named Scout, alerted handlers to an area between 2 large oak trees approximately 100 yards from a small seasonal stream. Using ground-penetrating radar, technicians identified an anomaly approximately 4 feet below the surface. The recovery process proceeded with extreme care. Forensic anthropologists supervised the excavation, using small hand tools to remove soil layer by layer. Every ounce of material was sifted through screens to capture the smallest fragments of evidence. At 2:40 that afternoon, the team uncovered human remains. The recovery continued for several more hours, collecting all biological material and surrounding soil samples. Among the remains, investigators discovered a tarnished silver charm bracelet with 3 charms, exactly as Frank had described. This item would later provide immediate preliminary identification, before DNA testing confirmed the scientific conclusion. The remains were transported to the State Medical Examiner's Office in Pittsburgh. DNA samples from Helen and Robert Biggs, collected years earlier during the initial investigation and preserved in the case file, were compared against samples from the recovered remains. On April 22, the medical examiner officially confirmed the identification. Amy Nicole Biggs had been found. Detective Martinez and Chief Reeves personally delivered the news to the Biggs family. After 37 years of uncertainty, Robert and Helen finally knew their daughter's fate with certainty. Helen, upon hearing the confirmation, simply nodded as if she had always known this day would come. Robert asked when they could bring Amy home. News spread rapidly through Oakdale. Residents who had lived with the mystery for decades gathered spontaneously in the town square, many bringing candles despite the daylight. Local churches opened their doors for community prayer. The high school lowered its flag to half-staff, and current students, born decades after Amy disappeared, learned about the case that had shaped their town's history long before their births. For the investigators who had worked on the case over the years, the discovery brought mixed emotions: satisfaction at providing answers, sorrow at confirming the worst fears, and reflection on the decades lost to uncertainty. The recovery of Amy's remains, while answering the most persistent question, also raised new ones about justice and closure after so many years. The discovery of Amy's remains set into motion the judicial process that had been delayed for nearly 4 decades. On April 27, 2020, the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office filed formal charges against Frank Miller. The 67-page indictment detailed the events of October 19, 1983, using Frank's own confession as the primary foundation for the case. Given Frank's terminal diagnosis, verified by medical records from Oakdale Memorial Hospital, County Judge Eleanor Winters granted a motion for expedited proceedings. The legal system, typically measured in months or years, compressed into weeks. Frank waived his right to a preliminary hearing, moving the case directly to the Court of Common Pleas in Oakdale County. On May 12, Frank appeared before the court for his arraignment. The small courtroom contained just 28 spectator seats, all filled by 7:30 that morning. Robert and Helen Biggs sat in the front row, their posture straight and expressions solemn as they faced the man responsible for their decades of uncertainty. Behind them sat former classmates of Amy's, retired police officers who had worked the original case, and current detectives who had processed the confession. Frank, dressed in an Orange County Jail jumpsuit, appeared frail and diminished. His once imposing 6'1" frame had withered to perhaps 130 pounds. A court-appointed attorney stood beside him as the charges were read aloud. When asked how he pleaded, Frank responded with a single word that eliminated the need for a trial: guilty. Judge Winters accepted the plea after ensuring Frank understood his rights and the consequences of his admission. The sentencing phase followed immediately. The prosecutor, District Attorney Maria Kendrick, presented the impact statements from the Biggs family, Amy's childhood friends, and community members whose lives had been forever altered by her disappearance. The defense presented mitigating factors, including Frank's terminal illness, his voluntary confession, and his cooperation with authorities in locating Amy's remains. His attorney explained that Frank sought no leniency, but wanted the court to understand his remorse. Judge Winters delivered her sentence on May 14th, life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Though Frank's prognosis suggested he would serve only months of this sentence, the symbolism of the maximum penalty provided a measure of justice many in Oakdale had never expected to witness. As Frank was led from the courtroom, Robert Biggs addressed the gathered press on the courthouse steps. Standing beside Helen, whose hand he held firmly in his own, he expressed gratitude to the investigators who never fully abandoned the case and acknowledged the bittersweet nature of a resolution that came too late to bring their daughter back. The sentencing sent ripples through various communities in Oakdale. Members of the Road Kings Motorcycle Club expressed shock and disbelief that someone they had ridden alongside for decades, harbored such a secret. Several longtime members arranged to speak with investigators, reviewing old photographs and records to determine if Frank might have been responsible for other unsolved cases. No connections were found. Throughout town, residents re-examined everyday interactions with Frank over the years, oil changes he performed on their vehicles, passing greetings on Main Street, his quiet presence at community events. The unremarkable nature of these encounters underscored how effectively ordinary behavior can mask extraordinary secrets. Frank was transferred to the medical unit at State Correctional Institution at Laurel Highlands, a facility equipped to handle inmates with severe health conditions. There, under constant supervision and with limited privileges, he began serving a sentence that justice demanded, but that his failing body would allow him to fulfill only partially. With Frank Miller beginning his abbreviated incarceration, Robert and Helen Biggs turned their attention to a task they had waited 37 years to complete, laying their daughter to rest. The medical examiner released Amy's remains to the family on June 3, 2020, allowing them to make arrangements that had seemed perpetually beyond reach. The memorial service held on June 7th at First Presbyterian Church of Oakdale drew hundreds of mourners spanning multiple generations. Amy's high school classmates, now in their early 50s, arrived with their adult children. Original investigators, many long retired, sat alongside current officers who had worked on the recovery. The church, which normally seated 300, arranged additional chairs in the fellowship hall where attendees could watch the service via video feed. During the service, 5 people shared memories of Amy: her best friend Sarah, her cheerleading coach, a favorite teacher, her cousin, and finally Robert. Their stories painted a portrait not of a victim, but of a vibrant 16-year-old with ambitions, quirks, and the limitless potential of youth. Several speakers commented on Amy's compassion for animals and her dream of becoming a veterinarian, a detail that would later inspire a fitting tribute. Following the service, a procession of 127 vehicles traveled slowly to Oakdale Cemetery. There, Amy was interred in the Biggs family plot, in a space reserved decades earlier, adjacent to where her parents would eventually rest. The headstone, crafted from blue-gray granite, featured a photograph of Amy in her cheerleading uniform, alongside the inscription, "Beloved daughter, finally at rest." In the weeks following the burial, Robert and Helen made an unexpected request through their attorney. They wished to meet with Frank Miller. After careful consideration and multiple consultations with psychologists, prison officials arranged a supervised meeting on July 21st in the prison medical facility's conference room. The 90-minute encounter between the Biggs and their daughter's confessed assailant remained private, though Helen later shared that they sought answers to questions only Frank could address, particularly about Amy's final moments. Frank reportedly told them that Amy had spoken of her parents before she passed, a detail that provided some measure of comfort amid unimaginable grief. Frank Miller died on August 9, 2020, just 3 months after his sentencing. As per his request, no funeral service was held. His few possessions were donated to a veterans organization, and his remains were cremated without ceremony. The resolution of Amy's case transformed the Amy Biggs Foundation. Rather than disbanding after achieving their primary goal, Robert and Helen restructured the organization to support cold case investigations nationwide. They established training programs for families of missing persons, teaching techniques they had developed through decades of advocacy. Amy's high school graduating class of 1985 created the Amy Biggs Memorial Scholarship, awarded annually to an Oakdale High School senior pursuing veterinary medicine. The first recipient, selected in May 2021, was a young woman who, like Amy, volunteered at the local animal shelter. Pinewood Park underwent significant changes as well. The trail where Amy had disappeared was officially named Amy's Way and equipped with emergency call boxes and improved lighting. Annual safety workshops at Oakdale schools now include age-appropriate discussions of Amy's case, ensuring her story serves as both memorial and protection for future generations. For Robert and Helen Biggs, finding Amy brought a complex peace. The uncertainty that had defined nearly 4 decades of their lives had been replaced with painful certainty. At the 1-year anniversary of recovering Amy, Helen planted 16 white roses at the grave, one for each year of her daughter's life. The not knowing was its own kind of torment, Robert explained to a documentary filmmaker in 2021. Now we can focus on remembering Amy's life instead of wondering about her fate. That's something we've waited a lifetime for.